Well, I would have said at the time quite a bit, but of course that really means not very much at all. I've always enjoyed history at school was my main subject, history and language, English language. But then experientially, I have no emotional connection to it really, except maybe in an empathetic way. But it wasn't really until I started to work on this film, read books about the famine in more detail, and then finally come here and get an emotional understanding of the impact that traumatic event still has today. That was something that was quite profoundly moving to me. Well, initially I met McDara Kelleher is the producer, and PJ, who wrote the script initially. PJ was a DOP on a film in Australia, and McDara was producing it, and there were a few other key Irish crew who ended up being on this as well. So it was a personal connection with them, talking about film, talking about this particular story. Because I said, "What are you guys doing next?" And I heard about it, and at that stage I wasn't going to be involved. We got talking about it. I said, "It sounds great, it sounds really interesting." And then, cut to about 6 months later, Mac said, "Hey, look, after we talked to you, we were actually kind of, we're interested. Would you be interested in playing this role?" And I said, "Yeah, I absolutely love to." So I read it, I loved it, and sort of on board quite a while ago. And of course, then there was a journey from that script to the script we ended up with. And then Lance came on board, and it was shifting again, and the way in which the story was being told had to be shifted, and marrying that genre, the particular genre, with the material. It's like, how do you do that? How do you make these things work? And that was always the battle that we were, how do we package this? How do we tell this story without destroying the vastness of the trauma? How do you do it without belittling that thing? Hannah's. I think we meet Hannah. He's a professional soldier. He's been fighting for the crown all of his adult life. He's completely worn down by trauma. Probably has PTSD. He wouldn't have known that, but he did traumatized. But being a professional soldier, he's internalized all of that trauma. So it's almost destroyed him. I think when we first meet him, he's one of the first things we see him do is he kills someone with his bare hands, but it's for no reason other than he wants to kill himself. I think he's like a dead man walking. So his journey is from that to being forced to go on this journey, tracking this man who he knows down, and that's the turning. That is for him a turning back, gives him a reason to sort of escape where he's been. So it's a minimal journey internally in one way, but it's just the fact that someone so destroyed can have some sense of hope is enough of a journey for someone like him. I think that thing of wrestling as Lance was with the script and with the material and with the tone of the piece. Lance always had said to me very early on, the palette is quite bled of color. The visual style is almost self-conscious, but the performance style needs to be really supernatural. We want to go into the character rather than anything being projected out. So that combining those two forces was always we were wrestling with the script as we were approaching and actually all the way through the shoot. Yeah. And then there are all the other aspects, just a thing of weather and horses and cold and different countries and small crew, tight budget. All of those things which you expect with a film anyway. But really, for me, doing justice to the material and also getting a sense of a truthfulness within a particularly damaged individual. Yes. Most of my stuff was in Wicklow actually, or Dublin. We were doing studio work in Luxembourg, which was crazy. So I came to Dublin, settled in here, did 3 weeks of all sorts of different things, and then over to Luxembourg. I came all this way to do an Irish film. I'm in Luxembourg in a studio. It's just mad. Yeah. So it was great to come back and finally work here, because when you're in the landscape, you can't fake that, because it informs so much for you. You don't have to do any acting really. I'm doing an adaptation of Measure for Measure by Australian filmmaker. It's a contemporary telling of the story, set in Melbourne in a couple of council apartment blocks. So that's exciting. And then after that, there's another film in Sydney, a photojournalist who's just come back from Syria, and his relationship with his wife and their child to be, and a South Sudanese man who he has met many years before, who's now a refugee in Australia. Well, I'm going to cheat a little here, because one of my favourite films is Barry Lyndon. Now, I wouldn't say it's an Irish film, but I think it is an Irish film. It's not, and it is a Kubrick, so it's pretty hard to beat. But Barry Lyndon to me is one of the great Kubrick films, and it has such a strong sense of Ireland. And I can't get enough of that film. I'll watch it again and again. I'm a big Beckett fan as well, so there was a fabulous little retelling of Waiting for Godot. It's not a film, but it's on screen, which I really loved as well. So